Hi, PF Bizarre Interest Productions, and we need to talk about Kamen Rider again because this time, everyone's kind of fed up, and now's the time to speak up. A while ago, I had said I made this channel to talk about and voice my thoughts instead of just letting other people and community opinions speak for me. And while I haven't talked about Tokusatsu in a while, this applies to everything I talk about. Even in shows and franchises with aspects I dislike, I've always stayed constructively critical in both positive and negative aspects. So when I make this video, I know exactly what type of negative comments I'm going to get from this video, but this has been a long time coming. Basically, the recent episode of number 1 Sentai Gozyuger had an episode where the monster of the week wears a hijab like an Arab and who is a thief. More so of a scammer, and the reactions have been all over the place between people who are and aren't Arab, either having a problem with it or not being upset. Personally, it's not my place to speak since I'm planning on catching up with Gozyuger and later Gavv, but now people are blaming Gotchard because one of the writers wrote the episode, specifically Keiji Hasegawa. Now, I have not seen Gozyuger, and this is a two-parter, so I need to see what the rest of the episode is like to make proper judgments, but Hasegawa has a reputation for handling serious and heavy subjects in its work, so I'm not going to cast any negativity just yet. Then there's also the fact that everything in an episode isn't solely decided by the writer. Remember, you have the producer and the director, and if you know about 01's behind-the-scenes decisions, we all know Takahashi had some aspects of his story pulled away from him. Hell, Hasegawa is a guest subwriter for the show. Not only do we not know if he's going to work on the show before or after the two-parter, writers aren't in charge of the costume department either, but blaming production solely on the writers. Unfortunately, because Tokusatsu's mature and earnest style of writing is popular, it's also attracted some of the most closed-minded people you will ever meet, and because Hasegawa was working on Gotchard, now the work is that if anyone who worked on Gotchard goes to a show, it'll be bad, like this tweets. The funny thing is, I'm pretty sure one of the co-writers, aka Akiko Inoue, got positioned as the head writer for Gozyuger. You know, the show so far people have little issues with, which makes sense. I'll get into rumors later, but there's this belief that out of the 3 head writers who worked on Gotchard, they all hated each other or worked against one another. When, save for one aspect, they mostly got along and agreed on everything. So why wouldn't Akiko entrust an episode of writing to a colleague she got along with? Then people looked back and found out that it wasn't Hasegawa who worked on Gavv's 31st and 32nd episode. It was the other co-writer, Hiroyuki Uchida, and claimed the episode was bad, which is funny since most people liked the episode and even joked that Uchida finally got good at writing tertiaries. This caused people in the Tokusatsu fandom to get fed up with how much strays Gotchard gets even long after the show has ended, and just this week, Twitter, Reddit, even YouTube has had people either confused on what Gotchard's getting slandered for, or people continuing to dog on the hate pile to the point that now that they're saying the writers have always been bad, despite Hasegawa especially working on some of people's favorite episodes of past Tokusatsu shows, Uchida working on writer projects people liked, and Akiko having done writing before she signed up. I guess Toku fans go by, hey, it's not what you did in the past, it's what you did now. So let's address all the issues surrounding how toxic the community has gotten with Gotchard, the rumors, the leakers, the people who wanted it to fail, and why is this behavior normalized? First off, let's start with how some of the rumors and initial reveals were received. When Gotchard was first announced, there was some skeptic when they heard Hasegawa in Uchida's name because Hasegawa worked on Double, Drive, and Forze, but people weren't happy he worked on Ghost and Saber, despite the fact when he was brought on, he either tried to flesh out the world building and push the plot when that happened, though Uchida got less hate since he not only worked on Girls Remix, but also a few well-received specials. Then there was a rumor that Hasegawa was going to make the show darker and mature, which I can't find a source for anymore, but Toei wouldn't let him, but allegedly that was just a mistranslation. Then the trailer and show dropped and people were comparing it to Nick Jr. That's not a joke, pull up the Marcosatsu screenshots. Hell, during the pre-release, they were saying that they wanted the main protagonist's mother to die because it would make the show more interesting because some Toku fans don't bop with the lighter tone of Kamen Rider. Yeah, no darker elements or tone, huh? Sure, buddy. But let's get to some of the rumors that were circulating throughout the show's run. Talked before about Majade before, but there's a lot of rumors circulating. So let's talk about the Kamen Rider Reddits. Who, okay, moderation aside for the main one, actually has a fair bit of nuance and community there, for the most part. But there was a certain user who took his hatred of Gotchard too far. Stridish. To make a long story short, Stridish was pretty toxic and ended up hated so bad for these takes that both our Kamen Rider and our Kamen Rider memes banned them. And those mods are actually pretty nice, so when they're pissed, you know there's a problem. No, seriously, people were actually celebrating. Why? Stridish would often make disgusting memes, comments, terrible jokes, and claims mostly because he hated Renee, Majade, and Rayo's actress. How bad did it get? Pretty bad. I will talk about the Majade Spanner debate later, but he'd make suggestive comments about Renee and sexualize her constantly. He spread a rumor that Rene's actress Reiwa Matsumoto was involved in Gravure, aka the Japanese adult film industry, and claimed it was from a reliable insider that she slept her way to get to the top. AKA, he was accusing the 16 to 17-year-old of bribing Toei Productions sexually in order to get her role. Also, because he was banned, I can't show you all of them, but I'll link the post in the description for what I could find. See, what I researched was that Reiwa actually passed a model audition held by Nico Petit, a magazine, out of over 8,000 applications and became the exclusive model. Then she was a model for Miss 17 2023. There's no evidence or research that shows Reiwa was involved in these activities, and even if she was, that's not an excuse to dunk on her because she would be a victim of exploitation as a minor. He also said that she had the worst performance of all secondary writers in terms of, fighting ability, and all female writers, which, even if you debate the first, she's not the weakest secondary writer. And if we're talking about female Kamen Riders, she's far from the worst, especially if you're looking at Heisei. We will talk about the rumor that Toei plans to kill off her character and replace her with Legend, but the claims Toei asked the writer to kick her out of the plot, or the claim she was going to die and that they changed their minds and put her in the movie, never had any backing, and some of those takes are pretty stupid when you just think about it for just a little. He was also pretty ableist, while also blaming Gotchard for the winter movies not featuring any other crossovers in the future, despite the fact Shirakura stated that they're reorganizing the structure in their winter movies and that they want more casual viewers to be able to come into a movie and not feel bogged down by all the amounts of writers and people who only follow the TV shows, especially given the reputation they received from Kamen Rider Black Sun and Shin Kamen Rider. But people don't fact check anymore. He was also relishing in the fact that Majade didn't get a solo song when Brave and Snipe didn't get one either, and assuming the Gotchard producers, Avex, and Gavv's producer hated her, even though Gavv didn't have any impact on Gotchard production, but semantics. He was so petty that when someone made a post about non-primary writers getting their own Kamen Rider title logo or something close to it, he laughed about how she was the only Reiwa secondary not to get her own logo, only for Majade Girls Remix to be announced, and 3 months after that, Kamen Rider memes shut him up real fast. Also, there was that time when Legend had some promotion with Gozyuger for some reason, and he got upset. So, yeah, needless to say, everyone was happy when he was gone, and the mods actively want to stop any of his backup accounts. The thing is, Stridish didn't exactly get these rumors or accusations out of nowhere. Oh, he propagated them and added his own flavor of misogyny, but he wasn't the sole culprit. Basically, around a few months before Gotchard began, there was a rumor going around that Gotchard was going to introduce a female protagonist as Gotchard, but to focus more on a second writer who's still male, they were going to kill off the female lead at the end of the first quarter if people didn't like her, and have the male secondary writer become Gotchard. In fact, those rumors turned out to be false because the source took a random part of an article from Revice to claim it as a source that was going on, complete with a wrong prediction on who the actress for Rene was going to be. Also, let's just debunk the whole Rene was going to be a writer nonsense. People have said Majade was originally created for a movie writer, but that's not true. During the end of the series interview with the Kamen Rider Gotchard producers for the Toei Tokusatsu fan club for the roundtable discussion, seriously, thank you Frenchie Steffi for translating this. Like, most of this video is thanks to you. Producer Minato confirmed that from the production side, they wanted to promote Majade as the secondary writer of the work, and that they wanted to focus on that, but due to product development constraints, the timing of Spanner becoming Kamen Rider Valvrod cannot be pushed back too far. With the end of the year came a ton of things they still wanted to do in terms of series composition, so in other words, there was no time to carefully work on the story of Rene becoming Majade throughout the main episodes. So in the midst of this, the meetings for the winter movie started, so the producer said, I propose, here we have the first appearance of the secondary writer Majade. She wasn't meant to only be movie exclusive, they just didn't have enough time to fit her in the show, so they elected to do so with the movie. Also, producer Minato, you know, the one in charge of things outside of Bandai, talked about how not only did he see and envision Rene as a heroine to the point they figured Rene was originally going to be Gotchard in the story, but wanted to explore her drive to eventually get her resolve to fight and become a Kamen Rider. But he came up with numerous ways to have Rene as a secondary. No, seriously, one of his plans was to give the villains a belt or a handsome male character, then have Rene inherit or steal the belt to become the secondary writer. Which, considering all the debates about how Sachika could even be a writer, is actually pretty laughable. If that's not them calling out Bandai on being sexist, I don't know what does. Hell, continuing with Reddit, some people just didn't want Gotchard to succeed. When episode 20 of Gotchard dropped, one person was surprised the ratings were about 6 and 7, where most people seemed to enjoy it based on the comments, and some people had figured it was either bots or that they'd stopped caring about the ratings and would just check the comments to see the episode's overall reception. Then this person went, Jesus! We fans who don't like Gotchard all quiet down about Gotchard now and we're still getting shit on. Why are you Gotchard fans so toxic? Move on already! The thing is, no one said anything of the sorts to or about her, and when people asked her about that, she basically doubled down and edited that she acted that way because she read comments that made her blood boil, accused anyone who enjoyed the show to be toxic, and then asked if it was because she was a 30-year-old woman. Personally, I'm glad there's more female voices in Rider, but I'll put the link. No one was being toxic to her at all, and she even admitted she got triggered over people just enjoying a Kamen Rider episode. Then again, if you're only watching Dawson Riders content to get your own input on the show, that's not really speaking for yourself now, is it? In fact, for episode 23, one of the mods added Reddit's verification, with the site owner taking a closer look on any future review bombings, and no one ever complained again because naturally, people in the community are going to want reliable sources on what the rest of the community thinks. Kamen Rider Reddit, you cool. Also, let's just address the biggest elephant in the room. So during Gotchard's rumor mill, well, around the time it was airing, there was a leaker who started the rumor that the show was doing bad and that because of the third arc after the movie, quote-unquote, new song, announcement of multiple writers, and the fact that new characters are being introduced, the show had a retool or massive rewrites that changed the trajectory of the show. Unfortunately, this account was later deleted, but one of the biggest rumors that person circulated was that Legend was going to be introduced into the show and replace Hotaro as the main protagonist. Then when the Legend arc aired, not only did we find out that wasn't the case, and a lot of bullshit, but in hindsight, the idea of a retool made no sense if you thought about it. First, the new song of Kemi X Story that was used episode 16 wasn't a new song. They just remixed the original Kemi X Story song and used a second verse. Only this time, flow was brought on. Some people have claimed with no evidence that the show was trying to hype people when this wasn't even the first time Kamen Rider has done this. Agito used a 2.7 version of its song from episode 36 to the finale, and Kamen Rider Den-O also ended up using the Den-liner form of Climax Jump to replace the original theme, which it was also just a cover of. The only opening change we know that ever happened was because of Blade, and we don't even know if it was the case, just that there was a shift in the writer's room for the second half of the show. Second of all, while Dread does not count as a secondary writer, we had it as early as episode 12 before the so-called retool as a side plot the girls were building up to alongside a pseudo-writer. Renee was already being set up as a heroine throughout the first arc with her decision to fight back against Atropos, culminating towards the end, and not only did people confirm she debuted as a writer in the movie, Legend already had a special airing during the first arc of the show. Plus, Gavv also continued the trend of having multiple posters to hype up the next arc, but no one ever says that show was reworked. And I wish I didn't delete the screenshot I had of it, but the leaker had claimed that the show had a retool, and someone asked how that could be the case. They had responded that there was clearly a behind-the-scenes change since they introduced new characters in the second and third arc like Greon, and Kyoka. For proof, someone asked them about the toy sales being good and pointed out arcs changed over the course of the show in the second quarter usually, but that's also funny because Greon was introduced as early as episode 5 as a concept when the sisters were talking about him, while Kyoka was her talking to Spanner episode 14. 2 episodes before this so-called retool. We just didn't see her face until episode 16. Same with Greon. But the dumbest part of this argument is that new characters are introduced in almost every second quarter of the show. Gavv introduced Ram and Bitter Gavv. Geets introduced Lopo, Nat Sparrow, and the sponsors. Revice introduced Takaishi. Saber introduced Yuri and Master Logos. And 01 introduced Dowser, Naki, and the Raiders. Zio, the Future Riders. Bill, the Crows. And Sato. X8, okay, fair, but we got Paradox's Rider form debut. Ghost, we got Necrom's form, and the rest of his family. Gaim introduced the Overlords and the New Generation Riders, particularly Minato and Ryoma. Hell, double Axel. Worst part is that when the second episode of the Legend arc, okay, technically the new semester arc, which began with the Renge 2-parter, then the Shakespeare 2-parter, then the Legend episodes, semantics, the creators outright confirmed they just wanted to use the opportunity to pay respect to the franchise through its past works, even using the parallel for Hotaro and Kaguya's respect for Kemi's and past Kamen Riders against Hunter's disrespectful imitations of. Even for episode 34, they wanted to use the opportunity to give the audience a 0-2 versus Arc 1 fight that 01 never had the chance to do because one of the producers who worked on 01 also worked on Gotchard. You know, guys, I think the person who worked on the Girls Remix wouldn't necessarily have a problem with also writing a crossover in the middle of the show. What was the leaker's response when someone confronted him about the lie and pointed out the evidence from the production notes? Well, they said a lot of things and always have. The production notes are not going to tell the out and out truth. Welcome to Japanese companies. If you think Toei would openly admit to things being bad behind the scenes during the filming of the show, I don't know what to tell you. I can only assert what I've been told personally. I don't care if you believe me or not, but this is the last time I'm discussing it. Now, I hear someone might bring up, what about Gotchard Daybreak not being part of the package of the Gotchard Igniter toy? Clearly there was a retool, right? Wrong. They came up with the idea of having a strong Gotchard before, and they pushed Alvarod's debut to not only push the Gotchard Igniter sales, since it wasn't selling all that well, so they killed two birds with one stone by having Daybreak Gotchard motivate Hotaru to make the Igniter first, then use the arc to lead into Alvarod's Igniter for his Rider debut. They even considered making him Minato or Fuga at one point. But because the Igniter for Valvarod was pushed back, Daybreak wasn't on the package of the toy, since they came up with the character after Igniter was debuted. Made for a good surprise though. The producers even said during the meeting they came up with the idea to make future Gotchard a Master Gotchard to be the protagonist's future appearance so it wouldn't be predictable and tied into the Alchemist of Dawn once they figured out all the kinks. So, basically, the directors and the writers on the show wrote why they wanted to do these type of things, and with no evidence, the leaker's response was, I was told this personally. Again, people put their trust in leakers because they're going out of their way to get information for us that isn't easily accessible. So why lie and spread misinformation if everyone's going to find out about the truth? But okay, maybe the show was doing bad in terms of the viewership, or ratings were bad, or financially, correct? Show didn't do bad financially, and yet people wanted it to anyway. Fine, let's talk about this. Matsuo confirmed Gotchard had more female viewership who kept watching TV after pre-cure for Kamen Rider Gotchard after years of that really not happening. Hence why for the movie they used the Miracle Lights featuring the motivation of cheering for part of the theme. Second, Gotchard sales made it to becoming the second highest earning Reiwa series at 24.2 billion units. Higher than every series except for 01 at the time, which is pretty impressive considering COVID was a factor, but we'll talk about that later. Naturally, Kamen Rider fans would be happy the series is doing well, right? Yeah, that clickbait didn't work out that well. So let's talk about the salt that caused this video to be made. The show's doing well, but that means the writing quality is bad and they won't be able to tell a story. The story quality suffers because Gotchard introduced toys in its first episodes. As if the first 15 episodes didn't introduce the sisters, Fuga's disappearance setting up Renee's self-worth arc with her resolve, the wrestler and Azashi situation, making the toys actual characters, Spanner's hints of memory wipes that got fleshed out later in Arc 3, an abusive father taking his rage out on his children, in the same episode of Thorpo's hints is more to Fuga than him being dead, and preparing Dread, Kyoka, and Grayon's future arrivals. Or how like every Kamen Rider show does this in the beginning of the show. Introduce toys while also setting up aspects of the show that would either be dropped or fleshed out upon later on. But toys being predatory. As if Toei hasn't been predatory in the past with how many of their toys and belts and drivers that get locked behind Premium Bandai and other special events. Yeah, that's not good in terms of ethics, but at the same time, where was this energy when Revice was locking everyone's drivers but Revice and lives behind more expensive products and putting in the Premium Bandai shelves, and that happened to some of Geet's characters too, despite having less suits to work with. Now, let's get back to the idea that Gotchard sales would impact writing quality, especially compared to what we know now. Minato, the producer, had said the previous work, Geets, was said to be popular with adults, but the response from young children was not as good. So this time they wanted to make a work that would appeal to a lot of children and aimed at younger people like preschoolers, but since Kamen Rider is a long-running series, there are many adult fans as well, so they wanted to strike a balance by being conscious of reaching that generation as well, which would explain why they brought Hasegawa on board. And they admit it was a struggle, and Kaneko even said they didn't want to just rush to toys without making an interesting story first, especially if there wasn't any emotions attached to it. But yeah, worries about innovation coming after Gotchard. Really funny in hindsight now that Gavv is being well received for the most part. Some of my followers have told me to check it out. Most people on Reddit, Twitter, and YouTube seem to like it. But like people, some people are just crashing out that the second quarter of Gavv wasn't doing that well. But we know that the third quarter got 1 point higher in terms of billion units than Gotchard did, and it's probably going to make at least 19 billion yen by the end of it. Again, why do we want Kamen Rider shows to fail? That, and it feels like Kamen Rider fans usually forget that one season is meant to be a mirror or contrast to what came before. Kaneko already talked about that. Well, Minato talked about this, but Drive was technological, so Ghost went spiritual. With X-Aid, it had the importance of life. Following X-Aid, Build was on how to maintain peace of life during war. Then Zeo was the anniversary, so 01 was a jump to the new era of technology. Saber was magical. Revice focused on the demons contract and how one person will make a contract in order to get what they want in life. Geats was about people tackling how to reach their desires themselves, and Gotchard was about finding a drive and passion for the next generation to move forward and achieve their desires, while Gavv focused on how to move forward after loss. And I didn't write this in the script, but Zetz is eventually going to talk about the importance of dreams. Besides, sales has never been an indication of writing quality, good or bad, but it ultimately comes down to execution. And remember, and this goes for all of Reiwa, we've been dealing with the pandemic, and yet Rider is still doing well. Yes, writing quality is subjective, but if I said by sales logic 01 is the best Reiwa season, half of y'all will start a civil war in the comment section. Also in this comment section, tell me, how do you rank the Reiwa seasons from best to worst, or, in my case, favorite to least favorites? Then again, why should I be surprised? When Cure Major was first announced, the same types of people that were claiming the show was going to be bad, because Saya was played by Kainon's actress from Ghost, and Jiro was going to be a hyperactive Red, hoping that Jiro's character would be killed off by episode 10. I am not joking, this is the quote from people older than me. Hopefully, as soon as we get to episode 10 or so of Cure Major, somebody died. Meanwhile, they're laughing in front of this. It was the Red, we have to replace him now. They won't kill a high school student. No, would they? What if they pull a Sun Vulcan and replace the Red part of the way through? First of all, the only people who like Sun Vulcan are people who don't want women to exist as superheroes. Also, yes, the Tokusatsu community also has an issue with high school superheroes. If you think Fourze, let me remind you that half of the community hates Fourze, or at least hated it, and only appreciated it later. And funny how Cure Major is one of the more beloved Sentai in recent years. Yeah, if someone says, hey, we weren't that hard in Cure Major when it was first announced, yes, not everyone was, but the vocal minority definitely was. But what about Geats and Gotchard fans going at it? Don't you hate one and not the other? Now, look, I don't know what's going on with the Toku community all the times, but you guys know it's possible to enjoy two shows that came after each other, one after the other, right? Didn't most people enjoy X8 and Build before someone online told them to hate Build? Yes, I know people say both of those shows are overrated, but still. See, Toku fans need to understand, while the writer, director, and producer will vary, most people working on these seasons are usually the same. A la most of the stunt actors, people figuring out the scouting locations, those practicing choreography, and the crossovers are never meant as series hating the other ones. Like, I'm not even gonna be funny, you will definitely find a Kamen Rider fan who likes Geats and Gotchards. Who knows? I might be one of them. Or maybe I hate both of them. But I'm happy for those who like both of them. Hell, what, are people gonna start a war between Geats versus Gavv on what's the best Reiwa series? Yes, you can make the argument that some people who are fans of one show and not the other show tend to accentuate the negative and treat one show as way worse than it has any right to be treated. But just because they're members of a Toku community who don't have any nuance whatsoever or don't know how to criticize properly, who just sound like blind, angry rage baiters who only think the franchise should be written in one particular way, doesn't mean that's a consensus. And we've seen before, people have spoken up about how they don't like how tribalist the Toku community can be. Look, if the characters could get along in a crossover movie, I'm sure you guys can get along too. Any other things to mention? Oh, yeah, a few. There have been at least like 2 Toku tubers who expressed the opinion of wanting to punch Hotaro's actor in the face, and one of them admitted to getting off on Hotaro bashing, but I'm not going to put them in the description because we're not here to call up. If you know who I'm talking about, you know who I'm talking about. Yeah, it's kind of sad that someone over the age of 30 is talking about wanting a 19-year-old actor to suffer just because they don't like the 17-year-old character they portray. But as someone pointed out, yeah, grown men talking about assaulting random teenagers is wild. Like, someone was literally told and was asked, is fantasizing about assaulting random teenagers your gotcha? Also, people were calling Renee a Mary Sue despite claiming she lost so much, despite that also being false, lol. And homophobia. Truly, we're collecting all the isms tonight. Oh, right, people were also upset about What's Your Fire being played so much. Yes, this was an actual thing. And guys, please, What's Your Fire was only used in 14 episodes out of 50. Blade's Kakusei was used in 21 episodes. Black's Black Hole Message was used in 24 episodes across both seasons. Agito's Believe Yourself was used in 28 episodes. And Ryuki's Hatanaki Ichino was used in 32 episodes. If Fires was airing right now, you complain People with No Name was overused, even though it was also barely underused. Like, it was only used like 13 times. And Dead or Alive was used 19 times. Like, y'all telling me when y'all watch Fires, y'all listen to People with No Name, Nama e no nai kizu suita, karada hito tsude, kokoro ga mata sakenderiru, itami wo kanjite mo. Wasn't a problem for some of y'all back then? Which is weird because people kept complaining starting from Ghost that they weren't using the insert themes all that much. Then Exit came along, and while they didn't include more insert themes, they weren't used as much as people wanted, which, fair. Then Volcano was used like once in Revice. We got Negai and Chair used only once in Geats or later in Jamato Awakening. Also, people didn't understand What's Your Fire was a song that could be related to everyone finding their fire or passion or goal in life until the translator had to point this out to them on Twitter. You know, Rene's goal of wanting to protect someone for a change, Spanner regaining his memories and finding his flame to become a Kamen Rider, even Fuga's declaration to light the torch for the new generation, Clotho's desire to reconnect her family. And yes, you could criticize the fact that there's some other characters who didn't get moments like this, such as Lycosis and Anthropos. But yeah, that's a criticism. Now I see why the show is aimed at younger kids, because the literacy rates were so low in adults that they needed high schoolers to teach people basic comprehension skills. This video is going to come across as me being mean, isn't it? Fair enough, but I'm not any more meaner than the people I'm talking about. Also, when Gozyuger was announced, some people did doubt the show wasn't going to do well because they didn't like Akiko's writing on Gotchard, despite not saying what parts of their writing they think she was bad at. To be fair, I do get people comparing her to her father, but she's better at balancing comedy and setting up and providing an actual explanation towards where power-ups come from. Also, a question for my audience. Anyone else feel like Toshiki could have really just said the Axel watch was made by Hanagata, and Hanagata just told Kusaka to entrust it to Takumi if he found his resolve? So I'm not gonna call hypocrisy because people complaining that Majade and Valvrad got their final forms in the end is laughable the moment you remember that Chaser Mock got his in the penultimate episode, meaning Majade's final form actually debuted before his debut if you calculate the numbers, but also seasons didn't even give their tertiary rider final forms in the show. Valkyrie and Espada got theirs in a V-Cinema. Meanwhile, everyone else onwards at least has been in the show, thank God, or thank Geats. And Gotchard's producers confirmed they had to fight Toei to even get theirs to happen. Yeah, in episode 48's production blogs, Toei views the final forms of secondaries and anyone beneath them aren't considered commercially for the story usually. But it turns out that it's usually the writers that try to get the power-up forms or the final forms at the end. And they have to have Toei present the story to Bandai so they can make it happen. Which makes you wonder, what characters in the past could have had final forms, but Bandai has said no to? Ibuki? Valkyrie back then? Which show do you think it feels like someone could have gotten a power-up or a final form that didn't get it? Because that may be the reason now that we have proof from the creators themselves. I'm adding this while in the middle of recording. There's been a bunch of debates about whether or not the Gotchard writers actually got along while writing, because a few Tokotubers had rumored that the writing was inconsistent despite the fact that there weren't any signs of that and no one really provided proof. And someone had asked whether or not they had different intentions when it came to writing, since we had 3 people on staff, Akiko, Hasegawa, and Uchida. While naturally there are going to be disagreements, there was never any claims or evidence between the writers having bad blood between one another. The closest thing you could make to argument before the ending of the show was that in episode 5 and episode 42, the original plan was for a Wrestler G episode was that Wrestler G was going to be retrieved by an old alchemist who would be Sabimaru's father, that was also going to delve more into an ordinary alchemist's life and what they do, and what does it mean to create chemies with an enemy monster targeting the old alchemist known as a debt collector. They were going to fight the Gorilla Amalgam, and Hotaro becomes Ant Wrestler like before, and has a wrestling match where Spanner joins as his corner man and second, but the duo don't work together that well. And it was described as a feud between Sabimaru and his father, with the question, will they overcome it thanks to the bond between Renge and Sabimaru? But they decided to focus on the relationship between chemis and humans, a la Azashi and Wrestlergy, so they discarded the story of the old alchemist, and when they found out that Uchida had a similar script from episode 42, they just recognized that was a complete coincidence, because episode 5 was written by Hasegawa. When they had the meeting, they just noticed the similarities, and it was producer Minato that told Uchida that they wanted to just write a story that they wanted to do before, but just didn't have the time for back then, or couldn't. Now, if you want to know when there was behind the scenes drama with the writers, here's the real juicy story. So you know how there was a debate about there being ship teasing between Hotaro and Rinne? Well, it turns out these were also debates going on in the writers' room. It turns out there was a civil war within the writers' room with Hasegawa and assistant producer Matsura wanting Hotaro and Rinne to officially be together and dating as a relationship upgrade by graduations, and Uchida with producer Minato claiming Hotaro and Rinne were just friends. So the director Tasaki tried finding a middle ground, claiming the relationship was a greater love that encompasses them, and Tasaki's interpretation aligned with the fans' view. I'm going to make a list of pieces of evidence in the description, but thank you, Battle of Saber, for fighting this. Like, we have seen ship wars before, but I have never seen one where the writers were fighting over whether or not the main duo should be a couple. Like, that is hilarious. Now, obviously, I'm not a coward. Personally, I think they should have just gone for it. Battle couples in action and romance seem to be more of a thing anyway, and that would actually benefit a lot of shows directed at boys, since the girl characters would actually be allowed to do something while also being able to keep up with the main protagonist. But it's extremely hilarious that this happened. But hey, at least I'm glad there was some sort of a compromise. And who knows, future installments could always explore these too. 4. Franchise people got into because they appreciated its more mature storytelling. It's really telling that some people are more immature than the show that they're actually criticizing. Yeah, a couple of months back, one person on Twitter ended up saying, you know, he likes the show and thought it was peak, and then people on Facebook started accusing him of being a pedophile. After saying that if he liked the show, he had to be under the age of 9, despite this franchise being a kid show. And while I don't know if the fan subs of the season were made out of time constraints, where the R slur was OK, the fact that they choose to use an image from O's with that word for word to make fun of someone, yeah, that's not cute. When Gotchard's season had ended, I wanted to do a full retrospective, but I didn't have the time, and I had like a lot of topics I wanted to talk about. And when I was looking at some of the reviews from other channels, I saw one YouTuber who talks about Toku saying they wanted to talk to someone on why they would like the show even though they didn't, only for no one to get back to them. And I actually was going to comment something back then, but I chose not to waste my time. Because after seeing how garbage the community has acted, my response would have easily been, with the way that you guys have been acting all this year, would anyone really want to talk to some of you guys? Because last I checked, Tokusatsu doesn't have this magical ability to turn people into douchebags. Oh, this doesn't apply to all Kamen Rider fans, but some fans have this problem where because they got into Kamen Rider and Super Sentai for how earnest the writing is and how seriously they take some of its concepts, it's resulted in a vocal minority in subsect that only considers a show good if it specifically appeals to what they want. Like, to certain fans, what makes a Kamen Rider show good would be every episode having twists and turns at every corner, insane world building yet somehow not having any victims or characters of the week, almost next to no toys but also somehow wants the toys to be used but only when barely necessary, yet somehow also find a way to integrate each one into the story properly with build up for every single one. They want a protagonist that can't be too optimistic, but can't be too cynical either, or they call them shonen despite the fact that shonen is a demographic, not a personality. They want a secondary writer that has to be consistently useful, but not so useful that it feels like they're overtaking the main character, while also making sure the heroes don't lose too much because people think that they'll be seeing them as frauds, but if they win too much, people complain that they're overpowered. They want each series to be dark and gritty and mature, but then complain if it's too dark. They want female characters to be used in the show, but then start a civil war over whether or not they should transform, because a woman transforming in a superhero show somehow takes away their humanity, despite complaining that women in the 2000s were always being killed off or underdeveloped, or that were never getting the chance to transform. Because apparently good writing is undermining half the people of an entire gender in your show. Do I think some of those aspects can make a season good or something that I personally enjoy? Sure. Do I want every Kamen Rider season to be or feel the same with the same character archetypes, the same types of plot lines, the same types of forms or amounts, and the same type of villains each and every time? No. Let's say I like Geats. I don't want every season to be the same thing as Geats. I want every season to be able to tackle its own themes, its own unique characters, its own premise, and its own plotline. And if there are parallels that are both unique and interesting to other shows that would be interesting to compare to Geats in a constructive lens, yes, that would be fun. Also, question chat, do you guys want me to do a video about whether or not Takahashi deserves the hate that he gets? Because while I would say the answer is no, I want to explore why the fandom got to this point in the first place. I am not the only person who said this, but a few days ago, there was a tweet thread that was basically able to summarize what the problem was. Some Toku fans only look at certain shows at face value without analyzing its themes, trying to understand what the show was trying to say, don't care about the behind-the-scenes issues or decisions, and would just make up stuff about Rider without actual evidence or proof. Granted, this is not the only fandom that does this, but considering how misinformation likes to get spread, it's very dangerous, especially when certain people are profiting off lying and said misinformation just to spread negativity without any constructive thoughts. Remember that time a person who hated Saber made a multi-hour video and called anyone who enjoyed the show or found any redeemable aspects of it a fake fan with low IQ? Or when Filipino fans spread a rumor that Hikaru's actor from Revice had his agency demand his character become a writer in the show in the lead role, and certain Westerner fans decided to propagate those rumors despite having no evidence, the same agency having Shigeyuki Totsugeri, aka Junta's actor, aka the father in Revice, in the main role, with him leaving every now and then because he had scheduling conflicts, agencies not having any control over whether or not their actors are prominent in a show, and the damn writer of the show, Hanata Kinoshita, confirmed that Hikaru's status as an ascended extra was out of his desire to do something with the character and his family, since he already had them set up from the beginning of the show for the weekend plot, and not forced upon him by anyone else that someone on our Kamen Rider found and translated. And let's not ignore that Hikaru's co-star was also wrongly accused of being a co-star that Asakura, Hana's actress, claimed was looking at her in a sexual way and was a victim of sexual harassment. So multiple scenes filmings featuring Hana and the unnamed co-star were cut, and the filming schedule were altered to accommodate for a Sakura situation, but having her and the co-star film at different times. But it clearly couldn't have been Hikaru because he's in shots with her during the final arc of the show, and we don't know if that person was a main or supporting character. Well, actor. Hell, it could have been a woman for all we know. It was never disclosed, but because people hate the character, well, let's blame the actor of the character we don't like instead of finding solid evidence. Who needs facts when you've got hot takes and anger? After all, what type of Toku fan would intentionally want a show to fail? There are Toku shows I'm not a fan of. There's 2 Power Ranger seasons I don't like, but I don't go around anyone who worked on these shows a complete idiot or a tool because I know what happened behind the scenes issues. I know exactly what to criticize, and my criticisms are based on how I think it can help the production make the best show they can possibly be. Not being a negative, pessimistic cynic that has nothing constructive to say, and you guys are going to see that on the channel if I make a Power Rangers video that's upcoming. And someone might come here and say, hey, you're just saying that no one's allowed to have criticisms. Not true, because if you want me to criticize any show, ask me. I'll criticize Gotchard right now. The show needed to show Hotaro's optimism clashing with the rest of his classmates and why him and Kazuki were considered outsiders. Give a reason to explain the social aspect of Renee's isolation from the alchemist side, explaining why she never got close to Sabi and Renge until Hotaro arrived, despite them also being chill and nice to her. Have the show use Renge's money of goal of using alchemy as a recurring background element throughout several episodes before her focus episode where they go to her village. Show a scene of Fuga working on the alchemist driver in the first 15 episodes for Rene before the movie drops for more build-up. Have Legend bond with Rene, Lacus, and Spanner in 2 out of the 3 episodes where he's the main character before making up a Hotaro in the final episodes, while also using the Legend arc and the Gigas arc to build up Spanner and Lacus' growing affection, while also getting Lacus more time to transform more as the second Valvarad. At least let Hotaro learn more about Kloto's origin, keep Fuga around after he returns for a longer reunion with Rene, where they talk about how he's proud of her and trusting that she'll surpass him. Have Greon confirm that he's tired of being used by the Dark King since he was only made from the creation, have his absorption of Germain be replicated more with their voices merge and Germain accepting his demise. Have Rene speak to Unicorn and Sun more or let us know what Hotaro's dad is, or tie in something that he said to Hotaro about not needing him and finding his own passion to add to Hotaro finally mastering alchemy enough to break out of the petrification in the final episode. And this is kind of the problem. While they're not as bad as YouTube grifters, having a criticism towards any Toku can easily become someone saying something is bad without explaining why that is, or playing up the truth of what happened to make it sound worse than it actually is. No one's asking what can be changed to make the show better that's not replacing the protagonist with a rival or edgy character who would like a rival whose identity to clash with. What plotlines could be improved with better pacing or increasing or expanding the roles of characters? Rather than get rid of characters, how can we use them better throughout the story? Which toys or power-ups needed more build-up or reason to happen? What's some wasted potential or mini-plots that could help the story if it was fleshed out? And even if I find a show bad, that is no excuse for even me to spread lies, misinformation without evidence, or claims that definitely aren't true. If this happened to any other show with the same level amount of hatred, I would do a video about that too. Apparently, some people wanted Judlin's head on a platter for what happened at the end of Dino Supercharge. And even though I think that finale could have worked without having the time travel, it was not so messed up that people should be asking for his execution. It's just a show at the end of the day. Anyways, either today or tomorrow when I'm recording this, I should provide you an example of how I criticize with Power Rangers for Power Rangers month. But if there's anything you should take away from this video, it's all artist subjective. Be careful about who you're listening to and where you're getting your information from. Always fact check. Remember that when it comes to fiction, not everything in life is a 0 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10, especially fiction. You don't have to be a part of a community, but if you are, use your voice if no one else will, and chill the hell out. For a show that was about teaching people not to get consumed by malice and negativity, some people in this fandom really could do a better job of learning how to avoid or spread it. Anyway, that's all for this video. Thanks for watching, and BIP for Oranges Productions. Just be kind to one another. Signing off.